Have you ever had something so close to your heart destroyed by people who thought they had power over you? That's exactly what happened to me when my local HOA decided that my old family barn was an eyesore and had no place in our neighborhood. The problem was, that barn wasn't just wood and bricks. It was a part of my family's history, a piece of my childhood, and a symbol of the hard work that built our land. But none of that mattered to the HOA. They thought their rules were bigger than my rights, and they made the biggest mistake of their lives when they tore it down without my permission. It all started with letters. At first, I ignored them. The HOA kept sending me notices saying the barn was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics. They called it unsafe, outdated, and not in line with community standards. But the truth was simple. The barn was fine. It had stood for decades. It was strong, sturdy, and safe. My grandfather built it with his own hands and had sheltered animals, stored harvests, and even hosted family events. To me, it wasn't just a building, it was a legacy. But HOAs are known for something else: control. They love to flex their power, and when someone stands up to them, they double down. I wrote back telling them that my barn was private property, that it had all the legal permits, and that they had no authority to demand its removal. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. One morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought the county was doing road work. But when I walked outside, I saw bulldozers, trucks, and workers gathered around my barn. And standing in front of them was the HOA president, clipboard in hand, with that smug look on her face that I'll never forget. "Excuse me," I shouted, running across my yard. "What do you think you're doing?" Her reply was cold and sharp. "We're enforcing community rules. This structure is not allowed. It's being removed." Before I could even process her words, I saw the machines push against the barn walls. The sound of cracking wood and breaking bricks echoed in my ears like gunfire. My heart sank. I screamed. I begged. I even threatened to call the police. But it didn't matter. In less than an hour, generations of family history were reduced to rubble. I stood there in shock, dust covering my clothes, my hands shaking. The barn that stood for decades was gone. The HOA walked away like nothing happened, like they hadn't just destroyed a part of my life. That day, I made a promise to myself. They would regret this. You see, most people give up when facing HOAs. They think it's too much of a fight. They think you can't win against them. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That barn wasn't just mine. It was my grandfather's legacy. It was proof of my family's hard work, and no group of power-hungry neighbors was going to erase it. So I did what they least expected. I lawyered up, and not just any lawyer. I found someone who specialized in property rights and HOA abuse cases. The moment I showed him the demolition photos, his eyes lit up. "They're in big trouble," he said. "We filed a lawsuit that very week." I sued the HOA for destruction of private property, violation of homeowner rights, emotional damages, and trespassing. The case wasn't small, it was explosive. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. At first, some neighbors whispered that I didn't stand a chance. They said the HOA always wins. But as more details came out, people started realizing this was different. In court, the HOA tried to argue that the barn was a safety hazard. They claimed it was collapsing and a danger to the community. But when the judge asked for proof, all they had were a few photos taken from a distance. No inspections, no official reports, nothing. On the other hand, my lawyer presented original building permits, structural reports showing the barn was sound, and even testimony from an engineer who confirmed it was safe. Then came the photos of the demolition itself. The bulldozers tearing through walls, the debris scattered across my land, the smug face of the HOA president as she supervised it all. The judge's face tightened as he looked at them, and in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. But the best part? When my lawyer presented evidence that the HOA had not only violated property rights, but had also used HOA funds, money collected from every homeowner, to pay for the demolition. That meant every neighbor's money had been stolen for this illegal act. Suddenly, the courtroom shifted. People in the gallery gasped. Some shook their heads in anger. The HOA wasn't just attacking me. They were betraying the entire community. The judge leaned forward and spoke words I'll never forget. This was an unlawful act of destruction. You had no authority to demolish this structure. You will not only compensate the homeowner for damages, but you will also rebuild this barn brick by brick at your own expense. Silence filled the room. The HOA president turned pale. Rebuild it? At their expense? Yes, that's exactly what the judge ordered. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Justice had spoken, and the HOA had to do the one thing they hated most: admit they were wrong. When I walked out of that courtroom, neighbors who once doubted me shook my hand. They said things like, "Good for you," and "It's about time someone stood up to them." And I realized something important. When you fight back against injustice, you don't just win for yourself. You win for everyone who's ever been bullied by people in power. The rebuilding process wasn't quick. The judge set strict terms. The barn had to be rebuilt exactly as it was, with the same materials, the same design, and the same care. Every brick they tore down had to be replaced. Every wooden beam had to be rebuilt. And the cost? It came directly from HOA funds. That meant the same board members who laughed as my barn crumbled now had to watch as their budgets drained to rebuild it. I can't even describe the satisfaction of watching them sweat as contractors worked under court orders. They had to report progress every week. They had to pay for inspectors. And they had to do it all knowing that the entire community was watching. By the time the barn was fully rebuilt, it was stronger, sturdier, and more beautiful than ever. And it stood as more than just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, they're never above the law. And here's the lesson. Don't let anyone bully you out of what's rightfully yours. HOA's bosses or anyone who abuses power, stand up to them. Fight back, because when you do, you might just inspire others to do the same. So let me ask you, if someone destroyed something you loved, would you fight for it, or would you walk away? I made my choice, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. You'd think the story ended when the judge forced the HOA to rebuild my barn brick by brick. After all, justice had been served. The building was back, stronger than ever, and the HOA had been humiliated in front of the entire community. But here's the truth. When people who love control get embarrassed, they don't stop, they get angry. And when they get angry, they make mistakes. The day my barn was finally rebuilt, I stood in front of it with a proud smile. Neighbors came by to see it. Some congratulated me. Others whispered about how the HOA had been put in their place. The barn wasn't just mine anymore. It became a landmark. It represented standing up for yourself. It represented what happens when ordinary people fight against power and win. But the HOA wasn't clapping. They were plotting. The president, the same woman who smirked while my barn was demolished, couldn't stand the fact that she'd lost. She didn't just lose in court. She lost respect, power, and credibility. Her neighbors no longer trusted her. Her board members were divided. And every dollar spent on rebuilding my barn was a reminder of her arrogance. So what did she do? She tried to strike back. It started with petty things. I got letters in the mail for grass too high, even when I had just cut it. I got warnings about improperly parked vehicles, even though my truck was parked exactly in my driveway. She even tried to fine me for having a doghouse in my backyard. It was laughable. She was desperate to find something, anything, that could give her back a sense of control. But here's the thing about desperate people. They don't know when to stop. And the more she harassed me, the stronger my case against her grew. My lawyer advised me to save every letter, every email, every photo. He told me, "You're not just defending yourself anymore. You're building something bigger." And he was right. One day, during a community meeting, things exploded. The HOA president stood up and gave a speech about protecting the neighborhood standards. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. One neighbor raised his hand and said, "Standards? You wasted our money tearing down a legal building, and now you're wasting more harassing him." Another neighbor stood up and shouted, "We should vote you out." The room erupted. People who had been silent for years suddenly spoke up. Stories poured out about unfair fines, bullying tactics, and misuse of funds. For the first time, the entire neighborhood saw the HOA for what it really was. Not a protector, but a bully. The board president tried to shut it down, banging her gavel, shouting about order, but it was too late. The tide had turned. The people wanted change. And I realized something powerful. This wasn't just about my barn anymore. It was about justice for everyone. The community pushed for a full audit of the HOA's finances. Guess what they found? Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Money meant for community upkeep had been redirected, misused, and even wasted on unnecessary legal battles like the one against me. It was corruption hiding in plain sight. When the audit results came out, the HOA board was forced to resign. The president, the same woman who thought she could bulldoze my life, was banned from ever holding a board position again. Neighbors who had once been scared now felt free. They held elections, voted in new leadership, and started running the community fairly. For the first time in years, people felt like they actually had a voice. And my barn, it stood proudly, a symbol of the change. But let me tell you something. Victory doesn't come without scars. Every time I walk past that barn, I think about the day it was demolished. I think about the anger, the sadness, the dust in the air, and the sound of bricks crashing. I'll never forget it. But I also remember the day the judge ruled in my favor. I remember the smiles of my neighbors when the truth came out. And most of all, I remember the lesson. Stand up for what's right, even if you stand alone at first. Because here's the thing, bullies, whether they're HOAs, bosses, or anyone else, only have power if you let them. The moment you push back, the moment you expose them, they crumble. That's exactly what happened here. The barn story spread beyond just our neighborhood. Local news picked it up. Reporters wanted interviews. Articles were written about the barn that was rebuilt brick by brick. Suddenly, I was getting calls from people in other towns, people who were also fighting their HOAs. They said things like, "Your story gave me courage, and now I know I'm not alone." That barn became more than a building. It became a symbol, a reminder that the law is stronger than intimidation, a reminder that one voice can spark a movement. Sometimes I walk out to the barn at sunset and just stand there, looking at the bricks glowing in the fading light. I think about my grandfather, who built it with his bare hands. I think about how proud he would be to see it still standing, still strong. And I think about how, in a strange way, the HOA gave me a gift. They thought they were destroying my past, but instead, they strengthened my future. So, what's the takeaway? Don't let fear silence you. Don't let anyone trick you into believing you're powerless. And most importantly, remember this. Every brick they try to tear down can be rebuilt, even stronger than before. Now I want to ask you, what's your barn? Maybe it's not a building. Maybe it's your dream, your family, your business, or your values. Whatever it is, don't let anyone bulldoze it. Stand your ground. Fight for it. Protect it. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the barn. It's about who you are and what you stand for. Backhand index pointing right, if this story gave you chills, if it made you feel like you're ready to stand up for yourself, then share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in the fight. And remember, the strongest structures aren't built in silence. They're built brick by brick through struggle, perseverance, and courage.